Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. If you've seen any of my recent lectures, you will know that it is my hypothesis that a group or groups who control the UK government, the Crown and the media are running a very subtle yet highly damaging subversion and demoralisation campaign against the general public and are using a range of techniques. If you want more explanation on this, please follow these links to lectures where it is all explained. Now, I'm running another subversion survey and I would like you to help me with it. The two areas I am seeking to expose are confusion and antagonism. Sometimes they are linked in that confusion can lead to antagonism. Let's deal with confusion first. It is my belief that the strategy of confusing the public is being used all the time. This works by first implanting certain beliefs or understanding in the public mindset over a certain period of time. This might be days or even years. Beliefs can be implanted through media stories, documentaries, reality TV, music, and many other genres. At some point, information is directed to the public which completely contradicts or causes conflict and imbalance with the initial implanted belief. This then creates confusion. Sometimes the strategy is for the confusion to lead to conflict, not just within the individual's mind, but between individuals or between groups of individuals. The issues or areas that conflict is being created over could be serious issues, mind-bogglingly trivial issues, or completely manufactured issues. There may be more than two belief positions being promulgated. I want you to tell me if you recognize what I am talking about, and tell me what the area is and through what medium the confusion is being spread. Email me at confusion@richplanet.net with your suggestions and observations. Many people think that mixed messages put out in our media is just part of the randomness of opinion and results from freedom of expression. I would beg to differ and suggest that confusion is a key part of the agenda and subjects are deliberately polarized. I suspect that in some cases the creation of confusion is done for a very specific singular reason, whereas in other cases it is for a more generic agenda, simply to create people with heads full of shit. The second part of the subversion survey is to report on strategies being used to create antagonism within society. Antagonism is created again by managing people's beliefs. There are many ways this is being done, but one method is to create prejudice or cause existing prejudice to be grossly exaggerated by making people feel hard done to. This can be done by, on the one hand, using propaganda to make people desire or covet what they don't have and probably will never have, and at the same time in some other propaganda portraying undeserving people being unjustly rewarded. Once you are antagonized, your thinking becomes primitive and your behavior is then much more easily manipulated. Reach for the pitchfork. If you want to report strategies being used to increase levels of antagonism, email me at antagonism@richplanet.net. I will draw up league tables for the top of the pops of both confusion and antagonism. Over recent months, I have been investigating more animal mutilation incidents. Those who are not familiar with this phenomenon, you can get up to speed via these links. Since 2015, there have been a number of horse mutilation incidents in the UK, at least 6 cases that I know of. One of the injuries on the horses that keeps turning up is very peculiar. In 2010, along with David Caton, I reported on a case in East Sussex. The animal had had its chestnuts surgically removed. Chestnuts are small, redundant lumps on horses' legs, which are thought to correspond to the wrist pad of dogs, although I think there is some contention over this point. Horses sometimes have them trimmed because they can look unsightly. Here's a clip from the 2010 documentary. It is safe to say that the mainstream media's coverage of this event is totally assumptive and not based on any of the facts. They are drawing premature conclusions based on the limited information that the police have decided to give them. A knife attack. This was not the opinion of animal mutilation expert David Caton. And the owner is keen to have a post-mortem done.
Yes, the horse owner is keen, yes. The chestnuts, which is sort of redundant
Part of the horse.
throwback of the horse, which is on the inside of the leg above the knee, and all four have been removed. Yeah.
And these are just little sort of £2 coin-sized lumps on horses' legs called chestnuts.
Yes.
And they've all been cut off.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that, David? Why?
No, I'm mystified by that. I mean, it's a new one on us. We've never known of that before.
Okay, that was in 2010. The extremely bizarre thing is that 2 of the recent horse mutilation cases, which were in an entirely different part of the UK, also had all 4 chestnuts excised. Here's a recent clip from one of those cases. And there's no obvious cause of death because the chestnut removal and the ear would not cause it to die, so something's killed it.
No, that's like you said. It's interesting to know how the horse has been put down.
So at least 3 horses that we know of that have been killed and mutilated in the UK have had all 4 chestnuts excised. In all cases, there was no sign of the chestnuts, so in each case the perpetrator has taken them. I hope to report in much more detail on the recent cases in my upcoming lecture tour, but I'd like to throw this out to viewers to give me your theories on why someone or something would need to excise the chestnuts from horses. We are baffled. Now, about 4 years ago, I went to a small observatory on top of a hill in a remote part of Wales called the Spaceguard Centre. An observatory which claims to be searching for near-Earth objects which might pose a threat to humanity. I've been given information by a particular researcher who claims this observatory could actually be being used as an observation post for animal mutilation cases, and the NEO, or Near-Earth Object story, could just be a cover. Apparently there have been many animal mutilation cases in that area. I went along to the observatory one day when it was closed to the public. In the grounds, there is what looks like an ancient stone circle, but it was actually built in 1997 and intriguingly is called the Diana Circle. Telescope dome, which I think is a 24-inch refractor, and it overlooks these valleys. Just going to have a look at the stone circle. On one of the stones, we read Diana's stone circle built in the year 1997. Right, good. Some of them have got astrological symbols on them. There's the one on this stone circle. If I turn around 180 degrees, on the other side there's a circle, a circle with a hole in it exactly the same. And there's one at 12 o'clock, if you like, one at 6 o'clock, and then there's one at 90 degrees to that over there. So there's 4. So that's about half an inch, but the hole is it's getting on for 2 inches. The depth of that hole, and I would say it's about maybe half an inch in diameter, which are all sort of pointing towards this ball. On one of the stones, there's holes going right the way through it. The question is, does this stone circle have function as well as form? That's the question. What are these holes for? Are they just decoration? I wonder if it's attached to a huge Van de Graaff generator underneath and maybe charges up and then floats off at night. It's very Bob Lazar. Perhaps there is an obvious explanation for these small holes within the stones. If you know of one, please let me know. Earlier this year I gave a lecture at Holmfirth, the home of Nora Batty, at the annual UFO Truth Conference hosted by Gary Heseltine and Larry Warren. I will be screening the talk on the rest of today's show, which is continued on next week's show.
Richard D. Hall, the new dad, in order.
Thank you, Larry and Gary. It's been quite a year for me because not only do I have a son, but I also lost my father. So I guess that makes me the boss now. Okay, so I'm going to put a rating on today's talk. Today's talk is rated PG. That's because there is some mild swear words in there and some animal mutilation images. So just put that warning on it first. So it's great to be here in the hometown of Nora Batty and Gary Heseltine. I don't mean at the same time, right? Okay, now what are we going to learn today in my talk? Well, I've tried to summarize it in one phrase. This is what we're going to learn today. If you accept information without evidence, expect shit. Now then, I've made a number of films over the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm just going to go through them just to start off today's lecture before we get into the core of what I'm going to talk about. 2009, I made a film called The Gateshead Grey. Now this was a story of a chap who alleged that in 1940 he witnessed a flying saucer, or it was an egg-shaped craft, land in his street, and he alleges that he was taken on board it, that he was examined. Incredible story, and this was a very popular film. Now Gary Heseltine actually wrote a detailed précis of this case before I made this film, and that was one of the things that inspired me to make the film, because Robert Hall lived within a few miles of where I lived, and my quest in that film was to try and find corroborating evidence to back up what he was saying, which wasn't easy considering it happened in 1940, but everything that he said that I could verify from independent sources was true. So he's either the best fabricator in the world, or there's something true about this case. Then in 2009 I made a film with David Caton, you saw him earlier today, called Silent Killers, and this charts much of the work of David Caton and the Animal Pathology Field Unit. Then in 2010 I thought I would tackle the crop circle mystery, but not really in a way that most people have tackled it thus far, because what I did in my film, I exposed the circle makers. So this chap here, John Lundberg, I provided what I would say is a vast amount of circumstantial evidence suggesting that he was linked to MI5, a lot of evidence. You might ask the question, well, why the hell does MI5 sponsor and fund the crop circle phenomenon? Well, it's all to do with the muddle up and the cover up. Because as David Caton said earlier on, to find a genuine crop circle now is nigh on impossible. And that's because the subject has been disinformed by the likes of John Lundberg, making hundreds of crop circles every year, while he himself, 1992 is when he started making them, but there were people before him who I suspect were also linked to MI5. So to me, the actual truth behind the crop circle mystery, there's something really important that they do not want people to know about, in my opinion, with this. I then made a film at very short notice because I got a telephone call from somebody who'd had a horse mutilation case turn up on their land. So I jumped in the car, picked David Caton up in Manchester, and we went down and we made a full hour-long documentary about this poor horse Rascal. And you can see here the classic jaw strip incision. Now, we've just had a case very similar to this case turn up less than 2 weeks ago in Leicestershire. Here's the news article here. It says, horse killed in barbaric blade attack in Syston. And of course, the media always get it wrong. It's not a barbaric blade attack. Now, I've been in touch with the owner of this horse. I've spoken to her at length, and she's given me quite a lot of details. And she's been getting the usual runaround from the authorities. there was indecision over whether this horse was going to get sent for post-mortem. Eventually they decided that it needed a post-mortem. But the woman who owns the horse thought she would get a copy of that post-mortem on the afternoon that it was done. Normally it would only take a few hours. And I think she's still waiting. In this article is the 8th of September. So it could be the same as what happened in the East Sussex case, where the owner was never given a copy of the post-mortem. But the people carrying out the post-mortem on this case, they did let a few things slip to the horse owner on the phone, and we've managed to establish certain facts about the case. The first interesting thing was that this horse had all 4 of its chestnuts removed. Now, chestnuts are these lumps on the side of an animal's leg, and strangely, the case in East Sussex, also all the chestnuts were removed. We also had the classic jaw strip, and we also had the ear excised. So there's some clear similarities. Same age as well, it's a 2-year-old horse. Now in this case, I'm just going to, because I got some high definition images off the owner of this horse. This is just 2 hours drive from here, less than 2 weeks ago. Now we can see there the incision, which is very interesting because the pathologist carrying out the post-mortem actually said that there was massive trauma to the neck, which you can actually see here, okay? So that's internal. Now, if that trauma was penetrating trauma rather than blunt trauma, what it means is that this hole here has probably been used to extract tissue or organs from the inside of the neck, which is why there's trauma within there. And they said, we can't understand this trauma, so we're going to send it for a CT scan. And this woman has not received a copy of the post-mortem. So here's a closer-up image of that hole. Now, I'm just going to read you, David Caton did a very rough preliminary report on this, and I'm just going to read a little extract from it. It says, I think it is possible that the 5-inch diameter hole about the right ear was cut primarily to facilitate extraction of a number of neck organs further down the neck. There are 2 closely spaced, deeper-looking cavities within this incision. Maybe the unknown organs have been withdrawn via these cavities. Now, if that's the case, and if the trauma in the neck was penetrating trauma, that means these organs have been removed while this animal was still alive. And all we get in our media is that it's just some nutter with a knife attack. You're not going to find this in our mainstream media. Okay. Now, the next film I made was called The Berwyn UFO Cover-Up Exposed, sometimes referred to as the Welsh Roswell. Now, probably Britain's second most famous UFO case after Rendlesham. This is Scott Felton, who tirelessly investigated this case for years and years. On the left there is an artist's impression of this 15-meter diameter sphere which came down gradually and landed on the side of the mountain and stayed there for over an hour. Now, the other aspect of this case was that sometime before this object landed, there was another object crash landed. Now, the British Geological Survey have tried to muddle up this case and say there was an earthquake. There was definitely no earthquake in the Berwyn Mountain case. Something crash landed. People even saw the thing coming down before it crash landed. There was a massive earth tremor, and then mysteriously this object came and sat on the side of the mountain. No one knows what it was. I don't know whether it's terrestrial or extraterrestrial. But what I do know is that our government have been trying to cover this up since 1974. Right, because the army, the military, were there within half an hour, and this is an extremely remote part of North Wales. So that suggests foreknowledge. I think that the military knew this was going to happen. You can see in the artist's impression there, that's torchlights going towards the object of the military. Now, Scott Felton here, he took part in a documentary in 2008 for Channel 5. He spent a whole day with the documentary team, and right at the last minute, the producer of the documentary was told, you've got to cut out all of Scott Felton's contribution to that documentary. So there's definitely been a cover-up on this case. But if you want to find the facts about the case, it's all in my film, The Berwyn UFO Cover-Up Exposed. All right, then in 2012, I investigated some very interesting UFO sightings in northeast Lincolnshire, which has now become known as the Lincolnshire Triangle. Various different types of UFO have been seen there, and in addition I was intrigued because right next to where all this activity had been going on for about 4 or 5 years, there was one of Britain's biggest ever sheep rustling incidents. So 1,500 sheep allegedly went missing overnight. So my hypothesis was perhaps the two are linked. And I made a film all about this in 2012, and I'm going to talk about further missing sheep cases that have happened in Lincolnshire today. All right, the next film that I made was called Almost Identified Flying Objects, which predominantly covered cases of football pitch-sized flying triangles, many of them over the UK. I gathered lots and lots of witness testimonies, but also in Belgium and in other parts of the world. And the fundamental argument of this film was not, hey, we're being visited by ETs, but it was, these objects are definitely in our skies and they're unacknowledged by our visible government. It's fact, absolute fact. I don't know who's piloting these things, but I think our government should be concerned about them and they should be investigating them, because they're definitely there. But they always try and push the argument onto, ooh, is it an ET craft or is it man-made? That's really not the argument at this point. The argument is they are definitely there. Nobody can deny that. So why aren't MPs discussing this in Parliament? All of these sightings of completely silent football pitch-sized black triangles. So there's a cover-up on this issue without any question. Now the next film I made was a very dark film called UFOs and NATO, which continued on from the work of animal mutilation, and it really centered around the testimony of a black ops soldier who contacted someone called Derek Goff in 1997 and gave him information on a unit that he was in, which was used to clean up after human mutilation cases and recover those bodies and make sure that they were never seen by the public or the authorities. He alleges that the team he was in was led by a NATO group and that he was hand-picked for this particular operation. Now, what I did was I wanted to try and speak to this military person myself, because only Derek Goff and Tony Dodd had spoken to this guy. So I wanted to get to the source, and it took me quite a while. It took me 2 years of sweet talking Derek Goff to get the guy's name and address, and then it took me quite a few bit of Dutch courage to go and knock on the guy's door, but eventually I got to speak to him, and I met with him 5 times, and all of the disclosures from this are in this film. This is a reconstruction of 2 bodies of a young man and a young woman which were allegedly found. I think I've traced it because I think I've got a corroborating newspaper article in 1990, August 1990, on the Brecon Beacons. Okay, now I then decided to have a diversion from the subject of UFOs, because I wanted to make a film which would really attack our woeful mainstream media. And I don't think UFOs is the best subject to attack the mainstream media on, and neither is 9/11 and other subjects. But the subject of Madeleine McCann, I thought was the best sort of Achilles heel, if you like, in the establishment media machine, because there's not a person on this planet doesn't know who that little girl is. And if you research the case, it becomes blatantly obvious that this is another cover-up. So I went out to Portugal, I investigated the case, I spoke to a lot of people, and I made this 4-hour documentary which reveals the true story of Madeleine McCann. In 2015, I also made a film about a lone gunman incident which I smelt a rat on from day one. This was a taxi driver, perfectly peaceful taxi driver, no background of violence whatsoever, gets out of his bed on a glorious summer's day, and he goes and shoots 12 people cold-blooded murder of 12 people, driving around in his car, shooting them supposedly at random. Now I've uncovered evidence in this film that there was at least one other gunman, right? And I do think, based on a lot of the witness statements, because I've spoken to a lot of witnesses in this case, that he was under some form of mind control. Okay, but I'm always drawn back to this subject of ufology, and I'm going to give you the reason why. The reason why I'm always drawn back to this subject is because I believe this subject can provide the answer to the question of what is man's true genetic and spiritual origin. What are we doing on this planet? How do we get to be here on this tiny planet? What is the real sequence of events which brought the human race to inhabit this planet? And this subject, I think, is the only subject which can shed light on that question. And you've got to admit that's the biggest question that we face. Where did we come from? Because the two usual avenues that people go to try and find answers to that question are science and religion. Now, if you consider science, science has handcuffed itself to this flawed theory of evolution. If you operate in a scientific field, you're not allowed to talk about human origins unless your theory fits nice and snugly with Darwinian evolution. And I think that theory has got holes all over it. If you look at religion, well, religions have been rewritten by human beings for the agendas of human beings. And that's the reason why I don't think religion can provide the answer. But ufology is an extremely open-minded subject. And I don't think I have to tell the people in this audience why this subject can possibly bring about answers to those really important questions, the ancient astronaut theories and things like that. And one person who's written about and spoken about human origins for a big part of his life was Lloyd Pye. Now, I was fortunate enough to meet and interview Lloyd Pye in 2010. This is a photograph from an interview which we did. And Lloyd Pye, just in a nutshell, he believes that around about 200,000 years ago, someone or something was carrying out genetic engineering on this planet, and we are a result of that, and other species as well. So I'm just going to show you a brief clip from the last part of this interview. And if and when this is accepted by mainstream, what's going to change on our planet?
Everything. Everything. I think that when disclosure, I think that right now you and I have lived in what's called the post-war era. I think that World War II was a defining time, and everything since then has been called post-war. Yeah. I think that the next big phase of existence for all of us is going to be post-disclosure, because it's going to lift everybody's game to a very different and higher level, because when we start accepting that we're not the only game in town, it will, I think, develop some humility in us. We'll just have to become a little bit more humble about our origins, and it will just create a different mindset from which I think a lot of good things can happen.
All right then, Lloyd. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Richard, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we do it again sometime.
Okay. Yeah, we need to accept we're not the only game in town, and we need to be a little bit more humble about our origins. I couldn't agree with him more. And you notice he said there, I hope we do it again sometime. I went to London 2 years ago, and I read Lloyd Pye's latest book, and Lloyd and I exchanged a lot of emails planning 3 lengthy interviews about his life's work. And I'd set up a little studio in the hotel to do the interviews with Lloyd, but he was too ill, he couldn't do it. And then 6 weeks later, he was dead. And I asked the question, was Lloyd Pye getting too close to the truth? I wonder. All right, now I'm going to ask the question, why might governments or their agencies be interested in, monitor, infiltrate, control, and even lead UFO research groups? Well, I can give 2 possible answers to that question. The first is to do with belief systems. What do I mean by belief systems? Well, your beliefs very much control your actions. Governments are very interested in controlling people's actions. If I told you lot, and you all believed me, that there was a UFO hovering outside this conference, I think most of you, along with me, would run outside and try and film it. So you're acting on a belief, right? So your beliefs very much determine your actions. Governments, we know, they want to control people, they want to control their actions. And they can do that by managing people's beliefs. Now, if you think about, let's say, belief systems of the past, religions. All religions talk about a creator, and that creator created the earth and created man. Now, if that creator created the earth, it means the creator is not from earth. So by very definition, the creator is an extraterrestrial. Now compare that to some of the theories in ufology. It's very, very similar. Many people think that we've been visited by extraterrestrials, and that they've had a hand in perhaps not just mankind, but in also the whole ecology and evolution of the planet. So you can see how ufology is a belief system. And I don't think any government would leave a belief system like ufology to flourish on its own and find its own path. They want to have control of it, right? And that's why I think all of this is going on, right? The other reason why I think governments or their agencies might want to do all of this with UFO research groups is to do with sequestered technology. And we've got Stanton Friedman here today, probably one of the world's experts in that subject. I'm sure he's going to talk about Roswell at some point. But it's not just, say, crash retrievals that the government or US government has sequestered information and technology from. It's perhaps contact cases, people who've had contact, or even physical evidence, such as implants. And all of that kind of evidence is discussed at events like this. And the government, I know most people on the street don't realize it, but they're very interested in leading and being part of these groups. All right. Now, I spoke about animal mutilation, and there's been, in the past, there have been a few cases where people swear that animal disappearance cases are linked to UFOs. So there was the Alan Godfrey case. When Alan Godfrey was abducted in 1980, he was actually investigating a case of some cows that had somehow gone from a field and were in the middle of a housing estate. And then they went from the housing estate to another rugby pitch behind locked gates, right? And that happened on the same night he was abducted. So you can understand why people think that whatever happened to that herd of cows was related to the UFO. We've had cases in Riverston Farm where 158 cattle were allegedly locked in a shed. The farmer goes to make a cup of tea, the phone rings when he gets to the farmhouse, and all of his 158 cattle are in a field up the road. It's the other farmer saying, "What are your cows doing in my field?" He said, "No, they're in the shed." He said, "No, they're not, they're in the field." So he went back and they were gone, allegedly. I wasn't there. So now I became aware of this case in Lincolnshire, 1,500 sheep that supposedly have gone like this in one night. And it's right next to a case of very high UFO activity. So in 2012, I went to investigate this, and there's been 2 more cases in Lincolnshire in the same rough area. Right, one of 600 sheep and another of 300 sheep and 120 cattle. So I've been investigating this summer, and the rest of today's talk is about those investigations. But whatever evidence you find, you must go with that evidence. And if it doesn't point to something UFO, you must report it. Okay, so let's just mention this case, 1,500 sheep, Britain's biggest ever alleged sheep rustling incident in September 2011. So this is the article where I first found out about it on the BBC website. It says, "Sheep stolen from Stenagott for illegal abattoirs. Police believe almost 1,500 sheep stolen in Lincolnshire may have been taken to unlicensed abattoirs. The sheep were taken from a 40-acre field in Stenagott near Louth between 6 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday morning. Detective Constable Nick Jones said the theft would have involved several people and 2 livestock transporters. There were 579 ewes and 901 lambs in the field, estimated to be worth £100,000 when the theft took place." All right, now before I give you some more details on that actual sheep disappearance case, I'm going to run through what some of the UFO activity in Lincolnshire. It's actually northeast Lincolnshire. Now this is quite a sparsely populated area with slightly undulating hills, and it's a coastal area, and a lot of the UFOs have been seen in or near the coast. So this is a map of the area centered around a town called Louth, and the other towns and villages of significance are Mablethorpe, Alford, and also North Somercotes. So this is an article. This is the local newspaper. This is not a UFO site. It's a local newspaper. And I do find that occasionally local newspapers are better than national newspapers at covering this subject. So this is the 29th of October 2008. After reading the leader's story on Mr. Goring's extraordinary claims last week, a local UFO investigator has been to the village to scan the skies himself. The man, who asked not to be named, said, "I can now report I have been to Brink Hill twice, and on both occasions myself and a friend have seen the objects. I must say they are as Mr. Goring described. I saw 3 objects with lights on each point of the triangle with a large central light. The larger object flew within 100 feet of my car, and we experienced total electrical mayhem, and I felt charged with static. The objects are definitely not the Aurora Black Project plane, because it uses pulse scramjet engines, and these were silent, and we estimated they covered the distance from the coast to the Wolds in around a second, and that's not possible even for the Aurora." Now the next incident I'm going to tell you about occurred in January 2009. I'm sure you've all heard of it. This occurred at a place called North Somercotes, where there's quite a large wind turbine place where an object is alleged to have struck a wind turbine and actually caused the blade to fall off. I'm going to show you a clip, a mainstream media clip first, and then I'm going to show you some more statements.
People who live nearby say that it was hit by a UFO. Residents remember being woken in the early hours of Sunday morning by a huge crash. When the sun came up, one of the turbines was bent and broken. That came after several witnesses reported glowing spheres in the sky earlier the same night.
I just suddenly saw this light appear in front of us, and it just seemed to whiz sort of across the sky towards the wind turbines. I said, there was 2 or 3 of us in the car, and I just said to the other 2, what was that?
Several other people claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky, and one person even reported seeing an explosion.
Lights appeared first of all, and it wasn't, according to various locals you speak to, it wasn't just one kind of light. There were lots of different lights. There was a small light, says a county councillor. No, says another motorist. It was a massive light with tentacles hanging down, and it was all over these wind turbines, and then look what they woke up to.
I saw a light. I was travelling from North Somercotes to South Somercotes towards Louth. There was a light, a static light, which was over the wind turbines. It was white with a slight reddish surround. And as the car moved, the light seemed to move with us. Whether this was an illusion, I do not know. But as we turned the corner, the light seemed to turn the corner and then disappear.
And then the next thing you find out is that that wind turbine has been damaged.
I've just zoomed right in there so you can see the join where the blade joins the main rotating body. And they look pretty mechanically sound to me. If one of these blades just came off due to mechanical failure, I can't imagine it travelling very far. No more than a few hundred feet. And apparently it took them a while to find the missing blade, so I've heard. Now let's just clear this up about this missing blade. I was contacted by a guy whose friend worked in the health and safety in Lincolnshire Council, who was one of the first on the scene, and he says the blade was not there. Right? Now if you go back and look at media reports, the first media reports all say the blade is missing, mystery of the missing blade. Then the following day they all say, they found the blade and it's been whisked off for testing. Now I think the guy at the health and safety was probably correct, because I have not seen any photograph of that recovered blade. Right? You've got Sky News reporters there, and there was other news reporters there covering that case. If they've found that blade, right, this which was one of the main mysteries of the story, why hasn't it appeared in any newspaper, a photograph of it? Has anyone seen a photograph of the missing blade on that turbine? Anyone? No. And the mainstream media tried to say, it's been sent off for testing, and government-controlled publications like Fortune Times tried to say, it's mechanical failure. This is a 65-foot blade. 65 foot! And they, walking around the fields, they can't find a 65-foot blade from a wind turbine. Come on, give me a break. Speculation has continued amongst residents in Conisholme and the surrounding villages, with some saying they saw strange flashing, tentacle-shaped lights. Now remember that. Strange flashing, tentacle-shaped lights above the wind farm on the night before it happened. Mr. John Harrison of Saltfleetby described how on Saturday night, January the 3rd, he looked out of his landing window to see a massive ball of light with tentacles going right down to the ground over Conisholme wind farm. More eyewitnesses have come forward after speculation of a UFO hitting a wind farm turbine. Scores of witnesses have come forward to tell us their weird encounters over the past weeks. New eyewitnesses. Rebecca Hodgson of Louth was at her horse's stables off London Road, Louth, Saturday, January 3rd, the night before the 65-foot blade fell from the turbine in Conisholme, when her horse was spooked by a flashing orange ball in the sky. Rebecca described how her horse stopped suddenly and gazed up at the sky as a bright orange light circled above the turbines. She said, "It was really bright and glowing. It went dimmer and then moved horizontally across the sky." Now, we had a typical mainstream media response, Mail Online, saying unmanned stealth bomber could have been UFO responsible for destroying a wind turbine. The source of this article isn't named, so we can't go and speak to them. Now, does this fit what witnesses have been describing? I don't think so. So what all this article tells me is that they're trying to cover up something that really did happen. Now, further local media reports came in after this wind turbine incident into the local press. This article is all about what they were now calling the mysterious Lincolnshire Triangle being a UFO hotspot. Red Diamond UFO, this is July 2009, the same year, again, North Somercourts. Mablethorpe, just a little bit further down the coast, more strange lights. Okay, and this article, December 2011, latest UFO sighting off Mablethorpe coast fuels talk of extraterrestrial life. All right, now I actually interviewed a few of these UFO witnesses when I was doing my investigation. This is Eric Goring, who was quoted in some of the press reports. Now, what he described was a glowing ball of light coming down to the sky, from the sky, extremely fast. He said at thousands of miles an hour, looping out, and then suddenly there's just a black triangle hovering there above him, right, with lights at the corners, completely silent, and would depart very, very fast with no noise. And we've had that before in several cases where people, they just see balls of light and then suddenly it's a black triangle. That's quite common with black triangle cases. A woman, and I was just going around these villages going into shops and asking if people had seen things. These aren't people who've contacted me. This woman who ran a shop in Holmfirth, she was a nighttime taxi driver, and she was driving along the same road near where Eric Goring lives, and she also described seeing a totally silent black triangle, and she said it hovered above her car, and then in a moment it disappeared at phenomenal speed, totally silent. Now, she was told by a friend when she reported this, oh, that'll be XYZ black project which they're flying out of Conisholm RAF base. Now, I don't believe that, because if you go to bases like Conisholm, you get plane spotters there, like train spotters. There's even a place where you can park up where people film all the military aircraft coming in and out. And I'm not aware of anyone reporting anything silent. Every aircraft coming out of there you've got to wear earmuffs if you're near it. They're not silent, right? So she's not seen something that's been flown from Conisholm. Otherwise, airplane spotters would immediately say, hey, they're flying silent triangles out of this military base. And I'm not saying whether she's seen an ET craft or a man-made craft. I'm saying she's seen a silent black triangle which is not being flown in and out of UK military bases, as has the other gentleman. Now, the next witness, again, it's all in the same area. This is a broad daylight sighting, right, of something completely different. This is a huge egg-shaped craft, and I actually believe that this is the thing that caused the damage to the turbine, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute.
From Holmfirth to Mablethorpe, and it was actually on Staleby Crossroads.
Holmfirth to Mablethorpe Road, okay.
Yes. And I came to court to it, and it's pretty blind because there's trees either side.
And were you heading towards Mablethorpe or back?
Yes, I was heading towards Mablethorpe.
Okay, so you're about two miles out of Holmfirth, heading towards Mablethorpe.
So I do that trip every single day.
Yeah.
And I do the school runs twice a day when my wife's not here. And the sunroof was there and everything. It's got a sunroof. I remember that really, really vividly. And I came round the corner, and my little girl was in the back, and she screamed. And the car in front of her stopped, and there was this grey egg-shaped thing, like a king, because I can say. And it was, say the road's 20 feet across, because it's a normal size A road. I would say it was 3 times wider than the road. What came to mind was a huge, I thought it was like a Westland Wessex helicopter. That's what came into my mind. Because they're like big bulbous thing. It was stopped right above the road, and it was absolutely huge. Like it was bigger than a plane, massive. And it was just moving forward about 1 mile an hour.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it just shot back the opposite direction, the same way it came, but
So which direction did it come from?
The east.
So from the
field.
So from the sea, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it shot back towards the sea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you managed to pin down a date yet?
The date, I have no idea.
But you said it was September, yeah?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was September, because that's the month that I had that black FTO.
Right.
That's the only way I can really pinpoint it.
But you think was it a school day because you'd pick your kids up or not?
It was definitely 100% a school day.
Okay.
It was only 20 feet above the road, and it was bigger than the road and the tree. It was massive. I can't put it into scale. So if it's next to a car, If it was like next to a car, it would be the size of 10 double-decker buses.
Right.
That's it.
So it was 3 times the width of the road, you said?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, it was like the only thing you could see when you looked up. You couldn't see the sky around it.
Okay.
And that was freaky because the way it shot back, it was instant, and my girl was crying her eyes out. And my boy was, oh my God, what was that? What was that?
And so no noise at all?
Pardon?
No noise at all?
Absolutely no noise. The only thing that was weird, I could taste. It was like, I could taste, that sounds stupid, I sound like an idiot. I could taste electric. You know, like,
yeah.
You know when you put an old PP3 battery on your tongue?
Yeah.
Taste that.
And you said you could smell like a transformer type smell. Right, now, some people will say, oh, well, he's seen an airship, okay? Now, I'm open to that, but he said it departed at phenomenal speed, and what he was clearly reporting there is the thing is electrically charged. Now, just go back to what the guy said about the thing at Connor's home. Now, I know from my background in electrical engineering, if you've got a large object which is charged, right, and it comes down towards the ground, as it gets nearer to the ground, the electric field between the charged object and the ground increases. Okay, you've got more volts per centimeter. And it'll come to a point where it will reach the breakdown voltage of air, and you will then get like a lightning strike going down to the ground. And you know, we're all familiar with this Nikola Tesla stuff that he's done, where you have these tentacle type things coming down to the ground. And what did our witness say in the local newspaper? It was like tentacle things coming down to the ground. That's why I think it's possible. What this chap has seen is the thing that's knocked the wind turbine blade off. And if we can just hypothesize a bit further, if you read books such as Secrets of Anti-Gravity by Dr. Paul Laviolette, and all of the alleged anti-gravity propulsion systems that they may have developed, most of them involve high voltage electricity. So let's just hypothesize that this craft has got some sort of anti-gravity propulsion system, right? In other words, it can generate its own gravity, right? In other words, say you were standing underneath it, you might feel a pull going up towards it, or a push, okay? Then that would explain possibly why the blade's gone missing, because the blades just got sucked up into the field, whatever field the craft is generating. It's a hypothesis, but it's based on evidence. Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today's show is a continuation of the lecture featured on last week's show. I'll give a quick summary just in case you missed it. I reported on the very high occurrence of UFO sightings in northeast Lincolnshire, which is a sparsely populated coastal region of the UK. One of the objects witnessed in broad daylight in September 2011 was reported as being the size of 10 double-decker buses, egg-shaped, electrically charged, and accelerated at impossible speed. Within a few weeks of this object being sighted, a local farm suffered an alleged theft of 1,500 sheep from a single field in a single night. This was the UK's biggest ever sheep rustling incident. In 2015, 2 further farms in Lincolnshire suffered similar, preposterously large numbers of sheep going missing in a single night. Currently, the 3 cases are all unsolved. That's an alleged total of 2,400 sheep gone missing without a trace. Now let's plot some of this evidence on a chart of a map. We've got Mablethorpe here on the east coast, multiple sightings there. We've got the wind turbine incident at North Somercotes. We've got multiple sightings at Louth. We've got our large egg-shaped object here that the gentleman saw in broad daylight. And we've got the triangle sightings down here. Now I'm going to show you where these 1,500 sheep disappeared from on the map. So it's right there. This is where the field is, where the 1,500 sheep disappeared. So you can see why I'm getting all excited about this. Now, this is the article on the BBC website, and there's an actual interview. You can listen to it if you want. It's in my film, with the detective who's investigating this. And he says things like, well, they must have had at least 2 wagons. They've obviously very organised. They must have had dogs. Don't buy meat from dodgy, shops and this kind of thing. So he's absolutely buying the fact that it's this massive rustling incident. 1,500 have gone overnight in big transporter trucks. So I went to investigate the case. This is the village where it supposedly happened, a place called Donington, very sparsely populated. Going into the local shop was like a scene from the League of Gentlemen. I said to the woman, do you know anything about these missing sheep? And she didn't actually say anything. She just sort of walked backwards back into the shop like this. All right. I got a bit more luck in the pub though. The best intelligence gathering establishments in the world, public houses. Right, so anyway, I managed to find the field. So here's Donington, the village, and this is the field here. It's a very big field. Here's some photographs that I took of it. Nothing spectacular. This is looking from the other side. It had an electric fence on one side, and a road on the other side, and fields on the other 2 sides. So I'll show you an aerial view. So we've got the electric fence going right the way along here, a country road going along here where feasibly a lorry could have come in. These green here are gates. There's a gate there, there's a gate there. But this is just fields here. So there's no roads here. So the only feasible point where sheep could have been taken is a gate here. All right. Now, the only house anywhere near the field was a house about 80 yards away where a couple were asleep in their bed, but they had a very alert dog, and you can actually hear it barking in the background. So I went to speak to that couple to find out if they'd actually heard anything. This is Patrick and Gabriella, and just standing in front of their house here. And if I just come out the house, the field starts just on that corner, because there's a fence going across from there. Right. So as you've gone around that corner to the left is where, at that point. Yes. Okay. Right. Now, on that particular night when these sheep disappeared, did you hear anything?
No, we didn't hear a thing, did we? No.
And I can hear the dog barking there now.
Yes. So. I'm a fairly heavy sleeper. My wife can be light sleeping, but neither of us heard anything.
Okay.
My dog would have heard something, I would have thought, if they'd been in the proximity of the house.
Now there are rumours that the shepherd and his wife were implicated, and that they were arrested. Perhaps for taking money from the people who turned up with these wagons.
Yes, that's what we'd heard.
That's what you'd heard.
He took a backhander because he was involved.
Now this is rumour, isn't it? You were telling me that you've not heard this, because I haven't seen that in the newspapers.
No.
You said you think you might be inside now.
Well, that's what I'd heard, but you know what people are like. Oh, he's locked up now and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
All I can assume was it was done in the early hours of the morning, in the dark, and how they did it without being seen or heard.
Because that's the other question. They would have had to have sheepdogs, 1,500 sheep, rounding them up. They just give the sheepdogs night vision goggles, perhaps.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether they use any dogs or what.
Well, I would have thought they'd have to.
Well, I would have thought so.
Unless it was just a gang of men running around the field. But I mean, the sheep were definitely in there about sort of 5 or 6 o'clock the night before, because I remember driving home and seeing them.
Right, so you're a witness to them being there at 6 o'clock.
They were there about tea time the night before.
Great.
Yes, and then not the next morning.
So, I mean, you're talking seeing a lot of sheep the night before.
Yes.
Because it's a huge amount of sheep, and then
it's a very big field.
So you're a first-hand witness to that following day. There was no sheep in the field.
That's right. Yeah.
So you were actually visited by Special Branch?
Yeah, Special Branch came to ask us if we'd heard anything. Because, you know, they reckoned there would have been quite a bit of noise. They reckoned they'd need at least 2 wagons and the noise of the sheep. I mean, you know, they're not quiet, are they?
No, they make a lot of noise.
And we had to say that we hadn't heard a thing.
All right, so obviously I've got to find out the guy who's been arrested, right? There was a shepherd, 60-odd-year-old, and his son, who was also a shepherd, and his wife. So 3 of them were arrested, and they were under suspicion for about 3 or 4 months. So, but I didn't know his name, and all I had was the fact that he lived in Nettleton. So I went to Nettleton, to another intelligence gathering establishment, where there was only one guy in the bar, and I said, oh, you know, do you know about these sheep then? He says, oh yeah, that'll be Arthur, he lives just over there. So I was able to find out where he lived, so I went and knocked on his door, and he said he'd been completely cleared, absolutely cleared, no suspicions, all charges dropped. All right. So for all the BBC reported the fact that 3 people had been arrested, they didn't report the fact that no one had been charged and nothing had come of it. Now, just to point out about physical evidence left if you're going to load 1,500 sheep. You can't just pull up with a massive transporter wagon, lower the track and expect them to run on to the thing, even with dogs. They'll do everything that they can not to go on in the thing. They'll run under the truck, they'll run into the bushes, they'll run... What you have to do is you have to erect a pen in the field first, with one end of it open. You herd them all into a pen, so you've got them all in one place. You then have to build like a walkway where you can open one of these out, a narrow walkway up onto the truck. Now they're milling around for quite a period when you're doing that for 1,500. Okay, you could do them in batches, but you're still going to have evidence of a pen, and you're going to have evidence of shit on the ground and wool on the ground and trampled down grass, so you're going to be able to see that it's been done. All right? Now, I sort of pestered the detective, and I managed to get this information out of him. This is an edited down interview with him on the phone. Well, it's not an interview, it's a telephone call that I've recorded. And listen to what he says in these comments. And by the way, if you go and look at his interview with the BBC, he's saying, oh yeah, they must have had these trucks and they must have had dogs and all of this. Just listen to these comments.
Hello, Nick Jones. Hello, Nick. This is Richard Hall. I spoke to you a few weeks ago about the missing sheep case at near Donington.
Oh, yes.
I've had a look at the lock on the gate, and it's not a new lock. But do you know if the gate was open or closed when the first person appeared on the? Sorry.
It was closed.
It was closed. And was there a lock on the gate?
Yeah. I seem to remember it was padlocked as well.
It was padlocked as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So everything in that.
As it is today, still in situ. As far as I'm aware, everything that was gated and locked was still intact.
Right, okay. And again, any evidence of any vehicles there?
No, nothing at all.
Okay.
So he said completely opposite to me than what he's actually gone on radio and said. Every gate was gated and locked, no evidence of any vehicles, nothing. All right, because he doesn't want to report something which is unexplained to him. At this point in time, it seemed as though there were no suspects, no evidence of an insurance job, and that's because the animal owner or the landowner is a multi-millionaire, and he'd put cameras around the field after the theft, right? So there was no evidence suggesting that he'd done it for insurance purposes. There's no physical evidence there, as you heard from the detective. There's no witnesses, and the field was padlocked and all the entrances were undisturbed. And we've had this UFO witnessed in the same month, this huge egg-shaped electrically charged object. So what I've said in the film is, does the evidence point to that, or does it point to that? Now, I'm not saying it is this, because I've since had further evidence. Now I'm just going to read these UFO sightings. So one of them took place just I don't know, about 15 miles north of this is where the 1,500 sheep went missing. So this is near Grimsby, and the second one a little bit further near the Humber. I'm just going to read these sighting reports out. Hi Richard, just watched the Lincolnshire Triangle programme. I'm from Grimsby, and the same month, September 2011, me and my brother saw a similar egg-shaped craft travelling over the village of Laceby/Irby upon Humber at roughly 8 AM to 8:45 AM. At first, I thought it was a blimp/airship for advertising at the Mercedes garage on the A46, but it was moving towards Binbrook quite slowly and over the Lincolnshire wolds. We observed it for about a minute, give or take 10 to 20 seconds, as we walked over Bradley Pitches from the Bradley Park estate. It was very large and was roughly a mile away. If it was a blimp/airship, it would have been stationary over the garage, and I'd have seen it in the previous days. There was no sound or visible lights on it. Now, I couldn't find any evidence of there being blimps or airships in Lincolnshire at that time. Okay, now here's another statement. This is a bit further north on the Humber. I was looking east and this light egg shape moving so fast cleared the sky in 2 seconds or less. The size I can surmise roughly as, think of the brightest star multiplied by 20 to 30 times, and that's about the size. Well, it made me shout, F me, excuse my French, but that's what I said at the time, attracting attention of my mate. But by the time he turned round, it had gone. He said it might be a meteor, but no way, this was too large, and it went in a straight line and was low. Okay, now, I've been investigating these 2 further cases, which happened this summer, 300 and 600 in 2 fields nearby, and I've made a few contacts there in the farming industry. Now, this guy has got I can't name him because it was given to me in confidence, but it's all recorded, and he's got quite a responsible role in the farming industry. He's not someone who's going to make things up. And what he said to me was that the shepherd had been taking 40 to 50 in a trailer every so often from the farm and selling them at an abattoir. I said to him, well, what about the ear tags? Because they're all electronically tagged. He can't just take someone else's sheep and sell them. He says, he laughed. This is someone who's in the farming industry and deals with buying and selling animals. He said, abattoirs don't scan ear tags. He said, they'll take sheep off anyone. So for all it is regulated, it's not policed, right? I said, okay. I said, well, how sure are you of this source then? He says, oh, absolutely. But I can't give you his name because he's someone who actually works on that estate. He says, but take it from me, that's what was happening. Now, that would explain the evidence. The fact that what he said is this guy is so wealthy, 1,500 sheep was absolutely nothing to him, and his eye wasn't on the ball, this extremely wealthy landowner, and the shepherd just one day thought, oh, well, I'll just sell a few, and then he sold a few more, and then at some point it was noticed, right? So he then had to concoct a story and just said, oh, well, they've all been taken. But the point being that the detective has just bought the story, hook, line and sinker, and gone on BBC Radio and reported the whole thing. He hasn't reported the evidence correctly. There's no evidence of any trucks. The gate was still locked. There's no evidence of any droppings in the field, which is what he should have done. Now, I don't rule out a UFO connection, right? But I think based on what this guy tells me, I'm more inclined to accept the more mundane explanation. However, I do think there is an undisclosed aerial vehicle flying around in that region. Okay. Now let's look at these other 2 cases that I've looked into this summer. The first one is about 15-20 miles north of the 1500, and this is 600 went missing. This is on the 2nd of June this year. So this is the story in Mail Online. It said, where did my sheep go? Farmers despair as rustlers with sheepdog steal entire flock, 600 in the dead of night. Now this is a slightly more populated area. There's a small village here. The field they were taken from is here, at this entrance here, marked A. This is the farmer. Now just look at that photograph. This is taken the day after they were taken from the field they were taken. Where's the evidence of rustling? Where's the evidence that a pen's being built? Where's the shit on the ground? Okay, I would have there's another photograph from the same article, clean as a whistle. And another one. I would expect it to look more something akin to that, right? So I've done my own artist's impression of what I think it should look like. So that raises suspicion in my eye straight away. So the article went on to say, police believe the raiders even brought their own sheepdog so they could round up the sheep quietly and load them onto a massive multi-tiered transporter at the remote rural location. Not a single witness of a multi-tiered transporter. They're assuming it. There were no witnesses. It was thought the flock was targeted by organised crime. Why was it thought that? In what is believed to be one of Britain's biggest sheep rustling operations. Mr. Steeper and his wife Natalie now may be forced to give up as a result of the theft. All the animals were microchipped, so without proper paperwork, the rustlers could sell them only to backstreet abattoirs. That's bollocks. Mr. Steeper said yesterday, I drove past on Wednesday morning and there were no sheep in the field and the gate was wide open. Then I realised the chain and padlock had been cut, but I could not believe they had taken the blooming lot. They must have been stolen to order. PC Tracy Teal of Humberside Police said, this is the biggest livestock case I have ever come across. The family have been victims of organised crime. They are very upset. They have been targeted in this way. It is a nice little village and everyone is shocked. All right, so when I saw that, I think, not sure I buy all of that. So I put a message out on Facebook to ask if there was anyone lived nearby to go and take photographs. And this chap, John Preston, obliged. So he went there. Okay, it was 10 days later by the time he got there to take photographs, and it had rained since. So you can see, since he took the photographs, 10 days later, you've got these tyre tracks going in, tractor tracks, which clearly been made after this photograph. But we did a little report. I went up there to meet him just to get a witness account of what he saw. There's regular traffic along this road even at night. It's not a quiet road. If you continue a few miles ahead of me there, you end up at Humberside Airport. This is the only point that a truck could have feasibly got in. So it splits off into two separate fields. The one on the left is not gated, so we don't think the sheep were taken from that field. Come round to the right here, and this is the gates that Jason Steeper was pictured at.
Well, the first thing we looked at, once we'd identified the field from the pictures in the Telegraph, we had a walk along the hedgerow, surmising that maybe some lorries had parked up on the roadside, and we then looked for any evidence of any sheep movement. There was no droppings anywhere. There was no evidence of any wool on either of the bushes or on the floor at all. So we then surmised that possibly the trucks came through this way into the field through this area here. The first thing what struck me though was this very sharp dog leg, and we've also got a quite deep ditch just there. Whether a large vehicle could get through there, I don't know. There was no sign of any tyre tracks going into the field, only these old ones. The main ones you could see was near the gate. There was obviously tractor tyres. The only tracks we did notice from the gate was, they looked like 4x4 tracks going into the gate and following this side of the field all the way as far as we could see. They didn't look deep, they didn't look particularly wide apart. It suggested to us that it was a 4x4 type of vehicle what made those tracks. And also through the gate there was no evidence again of any sheep movement through the gate or in that area at all, no droppings or wool around there at all. And we noticed when we was at the gate looking over the field, there's a small manor house just right at the very back of the field where you can see the top story windows looking over the field.
Right, so it seems there's no physical evidence of rustling there. Now, one thing I've learned, when you ring the police up, you first find out who the investigating officer is, but they will always refuse to give you any information because that's their policy. But what I've noticed is if you give them information, especially if they're not aware of it, they will give you information. So try and find something that they're not aware of first before you ask them the pertinent question. So I've chopped this interview down a bit just to give you a few of the pertinent points of the phone call.
Hello, Trace Teal, Ashford Police Station.
Hello there, my name's Richard Hall. I'm just ringing in connection with the stolen sheep at Melton Ross on the 2nd of June.
All right, yeah, I got a message earlier on to contact you, Richard.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are you aware of previous very large rustling incidents, particularly one in September 2011, a place called Donington, about 12 miles south of Melton Ross?
No, I'm not.
Right. Okay. There was 1,500 went missing. I know you were quoted in the press as saying that it's one of the biggest livestock cases you've ever seen.
Yes.
The one at Donington, there were 1,500 went missing on one night. The person who investigated it was Detective Constable Nick Jones, and I think he was at Skegness police station.
So it was in the Lincolnshire police area, was it?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. See, it said in the media that there was a dog. Now, I'm not aware of any evidence that a dog was used, other than the fact that it's assumed.
Yeah.
I mean, would that be the case, that it was assumed that a dog was used rather than they know a dog was used? Can you give me that?
Yeah, well, it is an assumption because of obviously the large numbers that would have been rounded up.
Right.
You know, and if somebody, I don't know, for example, was using other means, shouting, whistling, etc., and making a noise, then that would obviously have attracted interest in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's certain things you have to sort of think, well, if somebody's doing that,
mm-hmm.
How are they going to get them into transportation vehicles? And some sort of sheepdog would be the ideal tool to do that.
Right.
So, because we can't say, oh, well, a sheepdog was seen in the area and stuff like that.
Right.
That's not the case.
That's not the case. Yeah? So it's just made that up about the sheepdog. It's bullshit. There's no evidence of a sheepdog. So can we believe that there's evidence of a broken lock? So I went to the farmer's house. I knocked on his door. A young girl answered the door. And she says, oh no, he's away on holiday in Florida. I thought, has he got the compensation yet? Now, I tried to call him again and again and again. He's someone who doesn't answer his phone. All right? So there we go. No physical evidence that I've managed to establish of sheep rustling in that case. Now let's have a look at the other case down here, a place near Newark. I think it's about 20 miles southwest of the original 1500 here. Down here, a place near Newark. I think it's about 20 miles southwest of the original 1500 here. Here it is reported in the Lincolnshire Echo. Around 300 sheep and 120 cattle have been taken in a large-scale theft from a farm in Lincolnshire. Police are looking for witnesses and information about the incident in Brant Broughton. Officers believe offenders forced entry to a field near Beckingham Range and stole the animals between Sunday, July the 26th and Monday, July the 27th. That's this summer, this year. Now, 120 cattle, it is vastly more difficult to rustle cattle than it is sheep. The pen that you've got to erect in the field is like this, and to put 120 in, you're talking a big area. And again, much heavier equipment to get it onto the truck. Now, in the article, it said that these animals were taken from Brant Broughton. That's untrue. This is Brant Broughton here. It said a field near Beckingham Range. This is actually a military training camp. It's a firing range, outlined in red here, right? The animals were actually taken from the range. They were grazing on the range, the sheep and the cows, right? They weren't taken from Brant Broughton, as it says in the media article and in the police press release. This is 2 miles away. So there's some funny business going on with that report. They're trying to play down the fact that it's from military land, in my opinion. This is the Beckingham Ranges here. As I said, it's firing ranges. There's a military camp here, and these are what the military use for firing ranges and exercises. But when they're not using it, they have sheep grazing on there. Now this, where I've marked here, this is the entrance point here. You just pull off the motorway and there's a gate there, and that's allegedly where 120 cattle and 300 sheep were taken from in the dead of night, supposedly. Now, here's the police press release, which all of the newspapers cut and pasted and put in their newspapers. And just to reiterate, it says, were taken from a farm in Brant Broughton. Untrue. Right, and it says near to Beckingham Range. They were on the Beckingham Range. See, I would have thought that would have been the central selling point of that story. The newspapers saying 300 sheep and 120 cattle taken from under the MOD's nose. That should have been the important part of that article, but they were playing it down clearly. This is the gate where they were allegedly taken from. Ministry of Defence property, trespassers may be prosecuted. Do not touch any military debris. It may explode and kill you. Would you steal sheep from that land? Right? Now I managed to get there 18 days later. Okay, it's not very soon after, but you can see there's no evidence of rustling on the ground at that point in time. Now this is the camp here, which has oversight of that field. A military camp. This is the gate of the military camp. Defence Infrastructure Organisation, Beckingham Camp. Now, I started going around the local farms and started speaking to people, and I spoke to one farmer, and he straight away, I said, look, I'm looking into these sheep, and immediately he says, if I were interviewed, I would say it was all a fraud. And then he went on to cast huge aspersions against the farmer who was grazing his sheep on that land. He said that the sheep owner is well in with the commandant of the camp, Major John Aspinall. I then spoke to some other people, and I spoke to a guy who I would describe as a person with a highly responsible role in the farming community. And this is just some extracts of what he told me in the phone call. He says, this job at Beckingham, strictly off the record, is a complete load of shit. There was 37 cattle on that range. Nobody has seen 120. I live very close to the range. To gather 120 cattle, building the pens that can stand 120 cattle milling about in it, and then to load them and then pack all the pens away, making sure there was no marks, and wash all the shit off the grass is completely impossible. He was buying lambs out the fat and snipping the tags off the ears and putting in his own tags, which is illegal, by the way. But he was warned about this. It's amazing how the guy has got hold of it all, and I would think it's a complete den of conspiracy and underhandedness, because he came there with nothing and it doesn't stack up to me. And I spoke to another farmer who essentially said the same thing about the farmer who grazes his sheep on that land. So I decided to ring Major John Aspinall, who's allegedly well in with the farmer, the commandant of this base. He's in charge of the land. Now, I had a couple of phone calls with him. In those phone calls, he said that photographs were not taken, so that we can't see evidence of what was on the ground at the time. He said that the lock was smashed off, and he has that in his possession. I said to him, well, was there 300 sheep then? He says, oh no, I can't confirm that. He says, I couldn't tell you how many sheep there were. And then I said to him, well, it said on the press release there was 120 cattle. He says, oh no, 20 cattle. Definitely 20 cattle, not 120. All right, and he did say that there was shit on the ground, but it had all been cleaned up. All right, so let's look at this press release by the police. It's incorrect. 20 cattle, not 120 cattle. We think that the 300 claim is also incorrect. It didn't take place at a place called Brant Broughton. It didn't take place at a place near Beckenham Range. It took place at a place on Beckenham Range. So nearly everything in that press release is incorrect. And so I rang the police to tell them that. The rustling...
In relation to the sheep and the cattle that was stolen,
yes.
There were no photos taken at the time.
Right, okay.
It was just, obviously, the incident was reported and inquiries were ongoing, but there was no photographs taken at the time.
Are you PC Lawson?
I am, yeah.
All right, okay. So did you not go to the scene then?
I did go to the scene, yes.
All right, okay. So it's just the press release from the police says 120 cattle.
That's right. That's what was that was information given to me. Yeah, at the time.
Right. Okay. Well, I've been given information by the commandant of the base,
right,
who's responsible for the land there.
Right.
There was only 20 cattle.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the numbers that were given to me were clear numbers given to me at the time.
Right.
Obviously, you know. I can't obviously go into it too much about, know, but the numbers that were put out in the press release were the numbers that were quoted to me at the time of reporting the incident.
Right,
and
okay.
I have had some information from sources to suggest that the numbers might not be correct.
So it looks like fraud, agree? The clear numbers given to me at the time, but I've had information from other sources, so looks like an insurance job to me. So what can we say about these three cases? I suspect all of them, I don't know they are, but I suspect they're all inside jobs. They're not mass rustling incidents where you've got 4 and 5 wagons turning up in the middle of the night, highly sophisticated operations. They're dodgy farmers. That, in my opinion. But why can't we ascertain this when we look at our mainstream media? Yeah? We just get fed shit, as I've said at the beginning. Right? Because they never provide any evidence of anything. And you've got to go and investigate these cases. It took me a long time to get to the bottom of this. But if you're just going to work every day and looking at the newspaper, what chance have you got to find out the truth when we've got such woeful police and woeful media reporting? This is Alison Pratt from the National Farmers Union. Alison Pratt, a spokesman from the National Farmers Union, said, "These type of thefts obviously happen at night where fields are isolated, so there are no witnesses around. The culprits behind this must have been very organised and know how to handle sheep and dogs. So it could suggest that they have been in the business. They will have got to know the routine of the shepherd. It was a well set up job with specialist transport." Just have a listen to this for your own entertainment.
Hello, Alison Pratt speaking.
Hello Alison, my name's Richard Hall. I'm doing some research into the missing sheep in Lincolnshire.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Well, I've looked into...
A few lots gone recently.
Yes, I've looked into the ones at Beckingham Range.
Oh, yes.
Have you actually been to that site?
No, I'm just the region's communications advisor. I don't deal
Right,
with
so-
thefts or anything like that. All I do is talk about it.
Right. Okay. So can I ask where you got your information from for that particular one?
I think the Sleaford paper rang me on that one.
Say again.
The Sleaford Target, I think it was. They
Right.
rang me and said, did I have a comment on it?
Did you have a comment on it? Okay.
Yes, and all I said was, it's an exceptionally large amount of sheep, and they must have been very organised.
Right. Okay. Now, I'm very doubtful that there's been any theft at all from that particular field. Firstly, because it's military-controlled land where the sheep were taken from, and if you drive around that area, every 100 yards or so, there's a big sign saying, if you touch anything on this land, it may well explode and kill you. Now, I've also spoken to the person who owns the sheep on that military land, and he denied owning the sheep, even though he did own the sheep. And I've also been told by another farmer that he's been changing ear tags at Newark auctions. Now, I suspect it's a fraud. The 120 cattle. I spoke to another farmer, and he laughed when I said 120 had been taken from that particular land. Now,
Sorry, Richard, can I just ask what your interest is in it, and why you're calling? And are you something to do with insurance, or?
no, not insurance. It's just I make films about unexplained phenomena.
Oh, right.
You see, there was a
Well, this was definitely UFOs that came and took the sheep, I think.
well, I made a film about the 1500 which went missing at Stenigott.
Oh, yes,
Right.
the Dennis Estates ones, yes.
Now the particular theft, if it was a theft, which this didn't appear in the newspaper, the gate was still locked with the padlock intact. There was only one gate that the sheep could have gone from. Okay. Now that looked like it could have been an insurance job, right? Because there was no evidence that any sheep had passed through that entrance, right? I spoke to the detective, and now I spoke to the sheep owner, and I also spoke to the shepherd. The shepherd was arrested with his family, and he was under suspicion for several months, but they could find no evidence against him. And I also had a witness who saw the 1,500 sheep in the field the night before. It's all in my film. I made a film in 2012 about this. Now, there have been sightings of massive UFOs in that area around that time, right? Now, the 600 which have gone near Melton Ross, again, if you look at the photographs of Jason Steeper at the gate there, there's no sheep being through that gate. There's no wool, there's nothing. Now, if you were going to steal sheep, would you steal them from military land, which is observed by the military and signposts saying that you may well get shot if you come on this land? The farmer wasn't even able to tell me what gate they'd come through or where they'd parked the wagon. I don't know what's gone on with the one at Beckenham Ranges, but I don't believe they've been rustled. I believe those existed. I believe the ones at Melton Ross may have existed, and the ones at Stenigott may have existed, but you need to realise there's no evidence in any of these cases of rustling. It said in one of the articles that there was a sheepdog. I've rang the police and they've told me there was no sheepdog, or there's no evidence of a sheepdog. They've assumed there's a sheepdog. None of these cases there's evidence of tyre tracks, wool or droppings on the ground. I mean, you need to erect a pen in the field to pen them first, and then you need to build a track up onto the wagon. In all of these cases, you would need more than one wagon. The Stenigott one, you would need 5 wagons.
Yes, I know. This was the thing at the time, that we couldn't work out how
Right.
to do it. And with the Brand Bruton one, we can't
Yeah.
work out.
Now, I interviewed the couple who live right next to the field at Stenigott, and they've got a dog which barks at anyone, right? And they were only 80 yards away from that field, and they didn't hear a peep during the night. So people need to stop reporting these things as rustling, because it's not rustling. The reason why it's not rustling is because there is no evidence of rustling. What evidence do you know of that any of these cases are rustling?
why they're so mysterious, isn't it?
Right, so why do you say in your article the culprits behind this must have been, hang on, the culprits behind this must have been very organised and know how to handle sheep and dogs. So it could suggest that they have been in the business. Now, that statement that you've made there is based on no evidence at all. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, of course it is.
So why are you saying it?
Left for about, because I was presented with a story from the paper on which to give a comment, having the background in farming that I do.
So why are you assuming that there must be culprits?
Because there is no other logical explanation.
Yeah, but why assume that then if there's no other logical explanation?
Because that's the only explanation.
No, it's not. No, it's not. You go on the evidence. Why don't you just state what the evidence is? Why don't you just say, well, the animals aren't there. There's no evidence.
Really out of my ken. All I was asked to do was to provide a statement to the newspaper. All I said was that, in my opinion, it was a very organised theft. When the police were investigating him, I couldn't say anything.
Well, I suggest you go and speak to the local farmers there, because they will tell you one of them.
It's my job to do that. My job is to represent the farming industry to the press, and that's what I did. So I'm very grateful for your call, but I'm going to end it now. Okay?
All
Bye
right.
for now.
Bye-bye now.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish by saying what I said at the start. If you accept information without evidence, expect shit. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, following on from this lecture, I need to make several points. The first is that I am not accusing any individual of any crime. If crimes have been committed, then that's up to the police to find evidence and pursue that. What I am saying is that having investigated these 3 cases of extremely large numbers of sheep going missing, I could not find any evidence of large-scale sheep rustling. I suspect there has been no large-scale sheep rustling. But what I do believe, and this is a belief, it's not been expressed as a fact, I believe or I suspect that the 3 cases have involved either fraud or small numbers of sheep being taken over a longer period of time. But as I say, that's been expressed as a belief, not as a fact, and I'm not making any accusations. Now then, so to summarise then, I now do not believe at this point in time, with the evidence that I've seen, that the mass sheep disappearances in Lincolnshire are linked to the high level of UFO activity. Repeat, I don't think they're linked. I think it's a coincidence, having done much more investigating this summer. So, let's go back to the UFO activity, and I want to go back to the Conisholme incident, which took place in January 2009. This was the wind turbine. Many witnesses saw an object over the wind turbine, and the following day the turbine, one of the turbine blades was missing. I assert or believe that that blade was never ever found, and another blade was bent and damaged. A few years after this incident, I had a witness report to me something that he saw in broad daylight. This was a massive egg-shaped metallic-looking UFO. It hovered above his car and then it suddenly disappeared at phenomenal speed. But the interesting thing about it was that he said he could taste electric in his mouth. It was as if he'd put his tongue on a battery. He could sense electric in the air, and that is the presence of ozone, which is given off when we have electric discharge. Now, in order to demonstrate what I think witnesses saw when they were describing tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground, I decided to do a reconstruction. I'm in the Richplanet studio and I'm just demonstrating this mock-up that I've built, which shows what happens when a highly charged object comes down to the ground. So what we have here is a Tesla coil with 2 terminals. To one terminal I've attached a coat hanger and a piece of wire connected to a sphere which is wrapped in aluminium foil. The other terminal of the Tesla coil is attached to a flat plate which is also coated in aluminium foil. So what this is going to demonstrate is what happens when something which is highly charged comes down to the ground and we get electric discharge. And this, I suspect, is what was happening at the Lincolnshire UFO incident at the wind turbine, because witnesses described tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground. So in this particular mock-up, we've got over 30,000 volts being generated between the ball and the plate. So let's just demonstrate that and take a look. I can smell the ozone here now. I can smell electric. As the chap said in the clip, he could taste electric in his mouth, and after that amount of discharge, there's quite a bit of ozone that I can smell. I can sense it. We get these very interesting coronal discharges, which would look to an observer like tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground. Let's be clear here. I'm not saying that the damage to the turbine was caused by electric discharges from the craft. No. What I'm saying is that this craft may have been using an electrogravitic propulsion system, and for some reason was either damaged, or it had been brought down, or there was a navigation issue and brought the craft too low to the ground. Once that happened, two things occurred. Firstly, people witnessed electric discharges coming down to the ground, and secondly, we had the blade come off the turbine and one of them damaged. So I suspect that this craft impacted on the wind turbine, causing the damage, and I suspect because it was so close to the ground, this is when people witnessed the electric discharges. These two pieces of evidence suggest to me that this craft wasn't supposed to be that close to the ground. Let's now go back and have a look at what the Sky News reporter said.
Lights appeared first of all, and it wasn't, according to various locals you speak to, it wasn't just one kind of light. There were lots of different lights. There was a small light, says a county councillor. No, says another motorist. It was a massive light with tentacles hanging down.
So you can see he's trying to belittle the witnesses by saying that they couldn't agree on what they saw. But to me, it all makes sense, because the witness who just saw a light was probably seeing the object at a higher altitude, whereas the witness who saw tentacle lights coming down to the ground probably witnessed the object at a low altitude, hence it was causing electric discharge. But this again demonstrates the mainstream media's absolute lack of motivation to find the truth. I would argue that media teams were sent to this incident very quickly in order to make sure the story would be reported as some sort of mystery, which could never be solved and make people lose interest in any sort of objective explanation. In my opinion, the following is fairly clear. A very large, undisclosed craft which uses an electrogravitic propulsion system was being flown over the sparsely populated coastal area of Lincolnshire. This is what the evidence points to. The only questions which remain in my mind are who were the pilots or who was controlling it, who built it, and where is it based. Whether the craft was a human craft or even a non-human craft, I'm certain that the higher echelons of the military know about it. How would they know about it, Richard? Well, At this point, it is worth pointing out that if we go 17 miles west of the wind turbine, we come to the highest point in Lincolnshire, known as Normanby Hill. At this location, we find a covert radar system which has oversight of the entire area. The reason why it's covert is because it's inside a golf ball, so that people cannot tell which way the dish is pointed. This system would undoubtedly have picked up the object and is undoubtedly connected to GCHQ and probably other US intelligence networks. Believe me, they know what is going on. I don't know who these secret craft belong to that are being flown over northeast Lincolnshire without the public's permission. But isn't it an absolute disgrace that the powers that be work so hard to keep the information from the public? Remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.